to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Johnson, Keith Smokey Johnson, as I'm normally known as. And for those of you who might be new to this show, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show in which we correct errors where errors are found, and we introduce facts when we find that we're working on fiction when it comes to people of African descent. I'm heavy on the history because, to me, if you don't understand your history, if your history is false, then so will be your view of the present moment. You cannot function without history. If, God forbid, one of these lights hits me on the head, these studio lights, and I forget everything from this moment to time I was an infant, I would not be able to even leave this desk. I wouldn't know where my car is parked, or where my home is. I would unable to function as a viable human being. I would have to wait for somebody to tell me who I am. And if they decide to give me false information, I will thusly work based on that false information. You know? And another thing that's important, one of my heroes, of course, is Malcolm X, you know, who said, of all our studies, history is best prepared to reward our research. And what he means is, I mean, you could be a math genius, you could have scientific acuities that, you know, are great at physics. Those are great subject matters. But but history prepares us as human beings to function in this world. We work on historical data every day. You don't understand. Just like I said earlier about getting amnesia, that's historical data. Where I live, where I parked my car a couple of minutes ago. If I can't remember that, I won't move from this spot. Yet we're conditioned in this society somehow, for some reason, and it's deliberate. It's part of the conditioning process, especially for people of African descent, because we have a different narrative than the white population here in America. And why? Because there were laws. History shows you, if you understand the history, this is a so-called democracy. But we ain't there yet, fully. Okay, it was an experiment, as they say. Nearly 250 years ago, we created this country based on laws. And who shaped the laws will determine how we function as human beings here in America, to each other. And one of the sad things that people, again, don't want to talk about, thus what I'm going to continue from the first show, if you've seen it, I talked about the concept of critical race theory that's being attacked today, and we'll get there. But I want to lead into with these thoughts. You know, the fact is that race, the second word in critical race theory, has shaped America's concept of culture. Whatever this thing called democracy is was shaped by race, economics, and our citizenship. Who's defined as the citizens has all been shaped by this thing for race. Black people didn't do this. Whoever these people now we call white controlled everything. And the embedded in the word racism is the word race. And by law, and written in those laws based on the color of a particular pigmentation, we're not different species of humans, even though some people tried to say that to justify enslavement. All kinds of crazy things came out of the mouth of man in the last 200 years to justify the reason that we were held in bondage as enslaved, captive people that contradict even the man who wrote the words, all men are created equal, held 600 slaves through his lifetime. And we're still dealing with the effect of these contradictions in the 21st century. From the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Hundreds of years of living a lie. Until we hear, when you go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and you're laying on the couch or sitting in the chair across them, you have to, what did they start doing to you in order to heal you? Whatever type of psychological behaviors are being produced that are detrimental to you and your family around you. They had to go into your past. They got to talk about your history from whether you were assaulted as a little girl or a little boy, that it affected you as an adult, 30 years later, 40 years later, caused your drinking behavior, your drugs. It all has to do with something that's kept secret within you from your past. And America had to deal with its great secret. Oh, well, it's not a well-kept secret, but they try to keep it secret by not talking about it. They stopped talking about the enslaved people when they were in 1787 and shaping the Constitution. They agreed that they'll try not to bring it up. In fact, they said it wasn't. They're not going to deal with it maybe till the slave trade until 1808, and this was like in 1787, 1788, and it was ratified in 1789. That law, that same law, if you want to talk about what the race had to do with law, well, that law says if I lived at that time, I was only 3/5 of a human being. So when it comes to voting, for every 500 enslaved people in a state, it would be equivalent to 300 votes. That's how North Carolina and South Carolina and Rhode Island and all these places had power throughout the most part of the early 1800s. We weren't even counted in census as a human being by law. I think the first census of people that said, we found these 4 million human beings was in 1870. Okay? That's a long way from 1776, the land of the free and the home of the brave. But we don't have these discussions. Now, we started having these discussions only because we were forced into these by people who looked like me, who had afros during the days of the latter part of the 1960s, the Black Power movement, where we would say, as black people, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, and we would go and have sit-ins and marches and force colleges like Harvard and Yale and Notre Dame would sit in, demanding that we have scholarships about us. We don't want just to learn about, for 100 years prior to that, well, for most of American history, all the stories were always white-facing. That means we only saw white images. We only talked about the greatness of the white race. The English had a term called white man's burden to justify colonialism. It was the white man who went all over the world and conquered these black, brown, yellow people and colonized them, and it's our burden to, as the superior race, to teach them, civilize them. That kind of mentality was prominent throughout the world. And you're wondering why we have what we call these Karens and Kens still coming up to black people in the 21st century, even to this day, asking, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Get off my block. Still trying to control us. But if you come out of the society being taught a certain way to think, that's the only way you can understand why we need to change these moments. You know, you need historical data to function, like I said. When you go to a doctor, the doctor will not touch you until you get your medical records or your medical history. When you go get a loan, you're not going to get that loan unless we know your financial history. Everything is historical. Everything is historical. But the idea of talking to each other and having these difficult discussions is again being attacked by the same regime, like I talked on the previous show, part one of this discussion, that came out of the Trump administration or regime. It was not it was an authoritarian administration that lied to the people. I used the example of a book that many of you might be familiar with, called 1984, but I talked more on that the first show. But I wanted to talk about, for the rest of the show, what I see as being attacked, because I love history, and the study of history is important to understand what's going on now. There's a terminology that you might be familiar with or heard in the news media as pushed by the neocons or the remnants of the Trump regimes, the Republicans, conservatives, who are all throughout the country pushing this idea of changing laws, trying to push laws to prevent this concept called critical race theory that you see up on the screen. And I'm here for the next couple of minutes to quickly try to explain to you, they don't know what they're talking about. Everything that you hear in the news spoken out the mouth of these neocons or these white supremacists, Republican politicians that are infesting our state and local governments, trying to push this bogus outrage about critical race theory. Well, let me tell you about critical race theory a little bit. It's a theory, an actual theory that was established in 1975 at Harvard by this man, Professor Derek Bell, a black man. And like all historical black figures, he died in 2011 or 2012, just recently, quietly, nobody known about it, but his theory is being used to trick people into not talking about the truth of American history in relationship to race in America. Okay, like I said earlier, it's in it connects to everything that is America. The concept of culture and all these other aspects of it. But this great man came up with a way of shaping the thinking. All he's talking about, and he came from the direction of law because he was a professor at Harvard Law School. And it was only discussed, not in elementary school as you're being lied to at this moment, not in high school, not in junior high. None of those educational systems discussed critical race theory. It was strictly in graduate level law schools. First lie they try to push, just like the lie that you find in that book, 1984, by that Big Brother party that is trying to shape the thinking of the uninformed in the fictitious country of Oceania in the book, George Orwell's book. They're doing the exact same thing. And like I said in the earlier show, in the last 4 years of the authoritarian Trump regime, that book started to get very popular again, where people were rereading it seriously and seeing similarities. Not that we are there yet, because I couldn't talk about this if I was living in Oceania, the way the book put it. But it's a warning that we better wake up. There's elements of the authoritarian type of institutions that were already established in that fictitious country. You think I'm kidding? You're hearing the attack on critical race theory as a fake outrage, as a way of trying to get rid of the discussion of black history in America through the eyes of black Americans, which does not, of course, it doesn't make people look good. If the laws that were going back all the way to colonial time, you will find that every law basically had a concept of race. When you had black codes or slave codes, let's say, in the colonies, it told you how many slaves can just stand in a group, where they could go. There was the dictate of Maryland, the colony of Maryland, the dictate which says that black people in this colony could not benefit from the fruits of anything created by white people, even though the black people they're enslaved, okay, and were controlled by that white people, and their bodies were used to develop everything, but they could not benefit from that. Okay, that's a law. That's what critical race theory makes you do, critically analyze the contradiction. And if you ignore the contradiction and you go into the future, there's going to be problems, because the people who are not benefiting from that are going to be out in the street saying Black Lives Matter. And if you're 200 years later from the 1600s, or 300 years, or 400 years, you're saying, why are y'all upset, Black America? Well, look at how y'all treated us based just on the laws. And if you don't understand from our perspective, then we'll never change. Only a citizen, like I said before, in a true democracy like America, must have an accurate historical truth told to them. And when you have an accurate historical truth, like we're having some discussions like I'm doing right here and in classrooms, okay, critically analyzing the truth of how we deal with the complexities caused by these laws, slave codes. You have a constitution that says I'm 3/5 of a human being. How you work that in? Yet you have a Declaration of Independence that we celebrate every year on the 4th of July that said all men are created equal, and the man who wrote it owned 600 slaves. But you had to do mental gymnastics to try to explain that. And it's a fantasy. Instead of speaking the truth and how we could fix these wrongs. Black and white America. But if white America don't want to face this truth, or some, not all, but that's what these neocons are basically saying, we don't want to talk about the truth. We want to live in the mythology. We want to have the flag waving. We want to be the patriots. But we don't want to have the facts and the difficult truths that we have to heal. When you go to a doctor and you have a cyst that is hurting you and that needs surgery to cut it out, you can't just put a Band-Aid on it, called mythology, and think that the cyst is not going to affect whatever area it's infecting. Doesn't make sense. Critical race theory by Dr. Derek Bell and most people never heard of it. It came out again in 1975, and we're just talking about it and in the wrong context in 2021. And it ain't black people that introduced it to the world. It's the white conservative propaganda machine that using this terminology to push their agenda, not to benefit and heal America, but to bring more fear, just like Big Brother in Oceania give the people misinformation or lies to keep them thinking a certain way to maintain their power. That's what the conservatives are doing, and we better be careful. Again, we're not in Oceania, in the fictitious land of 1984, but we could be headed in that direction if we continue with this kind of nonsense that we're dealing with. You see, a community that is well informed about its own story, like we are trying to do for the last 50, 60 years, trying to inject our part of America into the dialogue to fix this, to heal this country, white America, it's not going to heal. It's just going to get worse. See, but the present moment is rooted in the past. Everything that I am right now is the result of a decision I made in the past. And like I said earlier, if that information is not there anymore, I won't be able to function as a human being. So these neocons want us to not remember our past, but to do things and function without that information. How could we? How could we function as an American society without that information? That's my point. That's why I always use the past to put, just like this studio lit up with these lights. History is are those lights, so that you can see what I'm doing now and understand and track my progress to this desk. Because if I'm in the dark, I'm going to be bumping into all kinds of stuff that won't help me have an organized way of understanding how I got here. And you think I'm talking fiction when I'm saying they're trying to shape how we think. In 2014, real quick, Russia and other authoritarian countries, and this is 2014, passed what is called memory laws. So I'm kind of 1984, it should have. You know, memory laws. What is that? Well, memory laws are what you see the Republicans doing now. They in Russia right now, they passed laws, and again in 2014, that condemn any kind and call them dissidents. Okay, anybody who writes, say, the truth history of, say, Stalin, what he did, the millions of people that he killed to heal. Okay, this is the truth. Stalin was a dictator. The Soviet Union did bad things. But this laws says you can't talk about this. We are going to shape the glory of Russia, the glory of the Soviet Union. That's what Putin wants. And guess what they're doing with these critical race theory, anti-critical race theory Republicans are pushing laws, aren't they? You're listening to the news, trying to prevent the teaching of black history, the truth of black history, in comparison to the mythology of this still being the land of the free and the home of the brave. We're not there yet when you put our history into it, and we must discuss it. So they want to pass laws, same as memory laws. Okay, they're going to give it some kind of pretty name, and that's what they're doing. That's the mentality, that's the controlling the ideas and the truth. And again, we ain't in Oceania, but if we don't, excuse me, if we don't watch it, we could be there. Just think of what I'm saying. There's a difference between reading a book and living that reality. And I'm just using this one trick that they're doing, using critical race theory to push their authoritarian agenda. Watch it. We still have the privilege of being American citizens and the right to vote. We need to get them out of office quick, especially in November of next year, 2022. Because if you don't see what they are pushing, these agendas, these memory laws, because that's what these are, no different than what's going on in Russia right now, because they're writing the books. And those people who are, just like we have professors and teachers who are teaching the truth about Black history, what do you do and how do you deal with a Jefferson who claims that all men are created equal, yet he has, through his lifetime, owned human beings, 600 of them. I could talk for hours about this, but this needs to be discussed. If this is First Amendment America, but the direction we're going with the curtailing of the rights of people who look like me or who have Asian ancestry or Latino, Latinx ancestry, leaving us out of the mix, is not what America's all about. Again, the present moment is rooted in the past. And as the ancient Egyptian was saying, you must know thyself. We must tell the truth in this society. We must be true to ourselves. But I gotta go. So peace. Hotep. Bye-bye.